Welcome to MusicWise, our third installment. We're so happy that people have begun to watch this with enthusiasm, and I've so appreciated all the comments and all the questions to the guest artist, the guest interviewee, and myself. Keep them coming. I can watch it all unfold in real time. So feel free to ask away. I'd like to start the conversation off right now and introduce to you a fantastic young composer, friend of mine, and she's just finishing her third-year residency, 3-year residency with the California Symphonies, our young American composer in residence. But there are so many other things. So let's get it started. Welcome, Katherine.
Hi. How's it going?
How are you? Good. How are you?
Well, I'm good.
Good. So you just finished teaching.
I did. I just ran over from my other Zoom classroom. Made it here just in time.
Which is like right around the corner.
Yeah, I'll show you how long it took.
Wow, what a commute. Welcome to MusicWise. When I was thinking about this concept of beginning sort of a Facebook Live thing and sort of recreating what I like to do for my pre-concert conversations, you were one of my first thoughts, one of the first people that came into my mind, because like me, you very much enjoy doing pre-concert talks and connecting with the audience. And we have done that on numerous occasions. And I just wanted to sort of get your thoughts on, from a composer's point of view, how you connect, how you feel the best ways from you can live such a solitary life, and then you get in front of an audience for your piece of music or for a concert, and going from shifting those gears can be very unique and special.
I think for me, I'm a pretty extroverted person, and when I write music, it's because I feel like I spend a lot of that time alone. Because I ultimately want to share that experience and share the music, and share with other people my experience in a way of writing it. And so, of course, I share my music when amazing performers like the California Symphony perform my music. But I feel like another way I can share my music is by inviting people into it, by saying a little bit about the piece, a little bit about myself, answering questions. What even is a living composer? I feel like a lot of audiences maybe don't know that there is such a vocation available to young musicians. So I think all of that is a way to invite people into the music and give them a more full experience.
Speaking of being a living composer, and for those of you who are meeting Katie for the first time, can you talk a little bit about, I'm always curious about when that spark happened. A lot of musicians, composers come from musical families, and so they may not know exactly, I was 4.5 years old and I remember it's often something that's just very natural. It was part of their world from before they were born. Was it like that for you, or was it a gradual awakening into this world of music and composition?
I think definitely the latter. I was always musically inclined, but I wasn't super serious about music until high school. Mm-hmm. And I certainly was not prodigious at any instrument. I played piano very seriously, but I was sort of told by my piano teacher serious enough around college times that I didn't play quite seriously enough to get into a top conservatory program.
Is that how they phrased it?
Oh, no. I mean, I did take auditions at conservatories, actually, as a pianist. But I was sort of warned by my teacher, like,
it's going to be hard.
It's going to, yeah. So I think it was a good experience taking some auditions, but I definitely realized pretty quickly that the piano performance route was not for me, which was fine. I was curious about lots of things. So I ended up doing
What were some of the other things you were curious about at that time?
I mean, I loved reading and writing. I was very interested in history and political science. I ended up doing a double degree with New England Conservatory and Tufts University so that I could continue pursuing my interest in political science. I definitely have always wanted to be a teacher. I come from a family of teachers, and it just wasn't clear to me what topic I would be teaching.
Right.
I really liked chemistry in high school. My parents are both actually biochemists, so I didn't want to do what they did, but I feel like I had my hands in a bunch of different things, and it took me a while to focus. And the great thing about composing is a composer, like, should, I think, in my opinion, have their hands in lots of different things, because if they're trying to figure out how to express their experience of the world in a musical way, the more experiences they have, the more that is in their toolbox for musical expression.
I find that conductors and composers are kindred spirits in that regard, especially because the more I know about many things, it informs my music making in a way that a practice room can't.
Yeah, I definitely agree. But I also definitely have a deep, deep, deep admiration for musicians that have put the type of dedication and focus into really mastering their instrument and their sound. And my music wouldn't exist without those people.
Speaking of, you decide to go to New England Conservatory and Tufts University. Why? Because they had that dual program, or was that something you found out along the way?
No, you have to apply separately for the dual degree. So I definitely wanted to go to a dual degree program to continue as both the liberal arts education on the one hand and the serious conservatory education on the other. And the Tufts NEC was just because, like, I was like, if I'm going to do a double degree, like, I want it to be obvious to people that I'm going to two schools at once.
Yeah. Because,
like, the Northwestern double degree or the Oberlin double degree, it was like, I felt like, I don't know, my obnoxious high school self was like, well, people will just think it's a double major. And I wanted to be clear that it's a double degree. So, yeah.
Of course you did.
And I'm not obnoxious like that anymore, I promise. I've really chilled out. As you can attest, you know.
Well, okay. So at this point, had you already started exploring composition, or was that still
Okay. So because I was sort of on this track where it wasn't clear if I was going to get in a music school for piano performance, I had been doing a lot of composing sort of for my high school theater shows and singer-songwriter stuff, and I played in a band, and
what did you play? What did you play in the band?
I played piano.
Cool.
Yeah, I played piano. I played in a jazz combo a lot when I was in high school. Played in jazz band, and I wasn't very good, but I certainly enjoyed it. So I had been writing a lot of music, and my teacher was like, you know, you can get a degree in that, and you can put together a portfolio. So
your piano teacher was saying.
Yeah, so I bought Sibelius and started engraving music for the first time.
So for those of you who don't know, Sibelius is one of the two major.
Because I mean, before that, all my music looked like this, and I couldn't just, mail that in.
So
I don't know.
This is very interesting to me because this style, how one composes can change as you grow older, as you learn, as you're studying with someone that you admire, you see how they compose, you start bringing in those techniques. At that point, when you were in high school and you were composing songs and pieces for your theater program, how did you compose? What was the process?
I think I improvised, and now I don't really improvise anymore. But I would improvise for hours at the piano.
Just hearing chords and melodies and
melodies. I mean, I was very interested in jazz harmony. And then, impressionist people like Debussy were some of my favorite people to play on the piano. Mm-hmm. I mean, I would improvise for hours, and sometimes I would write that down. I think my music my senior year of high school, my theater director and I turned this old Commedia dell'arte play into a musical, and the music for that, which was performed by me on the keyboard and some auxiliary percussion, and my band at the time, so a bassist, a drummer, and then a violinist to play some of the melodies, was all just lead sheets. So just like chords and melody. Yeah, like a jazz lead sheet.
Yeah.
And then I was sort of told, like, you can like but I had done some through composition stuff because I wrote a piece for a teacher's wedding, a little piano piece, and I thought it would be nice if she had like the music for that. So, so I through composed that as sort of like a gift to her, to give her the manuscript.
That's nice.
Which she still has.
We're at the time, because I love. I'm sure we'll see some of this, and folks can look on your website about, and we've also already posted. I posted a picture of part of the process of how you compose to this day today, in terms of the grid and the sort of the form of the piece. It's a very artistic expression, visually artistic expression. Was that already seeping in, or was that something later? We can talk about later.
Sorry, say that again. I was totally spacing out.
So how you sort of create an outline of the piece as a whole.
Oh, probably have one up here somewhere. I'm in my studio right now. My studio. It's also my bedroom.
And I'm in my studio / kitchen.
Yeah. And over here's the library, you can see. Yeah. And off behind there is the gym. It's also the kitchen. These kinds of things.
Right. Was this something that you had already been experimenting with then, or was that something later?
I painted a lot. My room is really embarrassing. My childhood, my high school bedroom is like the most teenage angsty high school room. It's all the walls are painted. With my it's really terrible to go back to. I feel like I'm back in high school.
But it's interesting to me because, sorry to interrupt, but it's interesting to me because the idea of creativity, whether it's art, visual, musical, dance, physical, I think this idea of being encouraged to have creativity and being a creative person is something that is not talked about amongst us, but just how this sort of can be coddled and cradled, and then it can express itself like it has in you, given the right circumstances. And those circumstances are interesting.
And the circumstances are also very indicative of the privilege and luxury of being able to, be supported financially and just like emotionally with parents that were interested in cultivating those aspects of my personality. I will never forget a conversation I had with my mother when I was practicing piano maybe 4 hours a day by that point in high school, and 4 to 6 hours a day. And my friends were starting to get jobs, and I was like, I should get a job, like where I could work at the grocery store, I could work at Subway, and my mom said, well, do you like practicing piano 4 hours a day? And I said, yeah. And she was like, then you don't need to get a job. And that's a sort of indicator of this space, time, and financial resources to be able to pursue what you want. And that's also part of the equation that's sort of allowed me to have the freedom that I've had, which is something, of course, I've been thinking about a lot recently. But anyways.
Having the time, yeah. So and we have some friends helping us out on our various Facebook pages. Because I don't, the last couple of times I've played music and it just doesn't work. The streaming, that's unfortunate. And hopefully that will improve soon. But we have some friends helping out who can post things. What was some of the music that and it doesn't have to be yours, but what were some of the things you were listening to then that you just...
In high school?
In high school. Like what were you obsessed with? Like,
I was obsessed with John Coltrane. I was obsessed with Felonious Monk.
So like Giant Steps or something else?
I think like A Love Supreme changed my life.
Mm-hmm.
Giant Steps. I think Ascension also changed my life. I think just knowing that, it's like the first time you hear that music, it's so abrasive or something. But the more you listen to it, the more you sort of trust that the music is this expressive entity that you might not yet be privy to all the information in the music, but repeated listenings allow you to be more privy to that expressive or emotional experience. I think those are the types of things you learn from listening to jazz, which really is a musical culture that is that rewards the patient listener.
Mm-hmm.
I think also at the time, Beethoven's piano sonatas were beginning to be really important and exciting to me, and Debussy's preludes and pieces. I hadn't really listened to ever any orchestra music or chamber music because it was not something I really did. So my chamber music vocabulary was jazz, standard jazz, especially like cool jazz into experimental jazz. So set the 60s through 80s.
It's so interesting to me because I don't think it's as interesting of a documentary as others, but there's a recent documentary on David Crosby from Crosby, Stills and Nash. I still find him very self-centered, but one of his first musical impressions, he was obsessed with jazz growing up. Obsessed. His older brother was also obsessed with jazz, and they went to a jazz club in Chicago, and John Coltrane was playing. And he was so overwhelmed. He said, he also said he was high as a kite going into this jazz club. But the intensity, nonstop intensity of John, can you imagine seeing that live?
I can't.
What that must have been. And he couldn't handle it. It was like it's this overload. And so he went into the bathroom so he could just not see what was happening. And apparently Coltrane was so in the moment, he also had to go to the bathroom, but was still playing his solos, like walking to the bathroom. And like Crosby remembers Coltrane like shoving the door open and still playing the instrument. It was so overwhelming to him that he fell back onto the floor. And and I think so much about John Coltrane. I also feel the same way, and my discovery of his music was exactly like yours. At first, it was like, "Wow, this is it's like too much information," and it just raw music, and it takes time to hear. And now I listen to those, to Love Supreme, or oh gosh, all of his albums. I think, what an amazing mind!
Yeah,
incredible musical mind, and beautiful, pure beauty.
Yeah, I think so many of his jazz musicians, like as a high schooler, sort of coming to terms with like just realizing how much you would need to invest in your instrument to become more proficient at it, be able to communicate what you wanted to with it. The stories and biographies of a lot of those jazz musicians were just things I had on my mind a lot.
And what's interesting, you also mentioned Felonious Monk, because of course the way they solo and they hear melody is quite a bit different, but they're almost, I guess it's very easy to say, obsessiveness about the repeated gesture. Felonious is much more simple in that, but the harmony is incredibly complex but it's still this compact repeated gesture. Coltrane's is a little longer in terms of his repeated gestures, but it's still the same idea of these repeated sequences, repeated gestures. Do you think that had any influence on you and the way you compose then, now, or at all?
When I think of Felonious Monk's music, of course, like that's music I haven't dived into for a long time. Most of the music I listen to now is like contemporary classical, honestly, or like folk music. But the two things, so the harmony, Monk's harmony, especially the voicings that would be really clear and spread out in the mid-range of the piano, but more tight clusters, tighter knit voicings at the top of the keyboard, which obviously resembles like the overtone series and stuff. Spectral music when I was in college became hugely important to me. I think a lot of seeds for being attracted to that type of music making happen in Thelonious Monk's voicings. the heavy, clear bass, a spread out middle register, and a more tightly knit higher register. That approach to harmony and harmonization is something I I think pretty evident in my music. It's something I the way I hear and the types of harmonies I'm drawn to.
Mm-hmm.
It's not dissimilar, I think, from Chopin or something, but it has a sort of activeness in when Felonious Monk plays. I think also this sense of like the pulse, but it's just about to teeter over. It's like the pulse is like this what's that game, Jenga?
Yeah.
And it's like, it's just like, oh man, I can't believe you just took that one out. Like, I can't believe the pulse is, so I feel like that approach to rhythm and this idea of a pulse, because that's something important in my music, but it's also often really off kilter, I think is something I like to think about too. There's another great jazz anecdote. I was just thinking about like people being shocked by just these brilliant minds that Alex Ross has in The Rest Is Noise, where Charlie Parker played a show in New York and Stravinsky was in the audience. And so he started quoting from Rite of Spring. And Stravinsky apparently dropped his glass and it like shattered. Like
for those
Parker
of you
just like saw Stravinsky in the audience and was and just started playing Rite of Spring.
Isn't that amazing that the encyclopedic knowledge of these Miles Davis was the same way, obsessed with all of those. He may not have ever quoted Stravinsky, but he would study Rite of Spring, Petrushka, all for the harmonies all the time. We'll put, by the way, the book that you just mentioned, it's Alex Ross's The Rest Is Noise, which in my opinion is one of the greatest books about music making there is, and it's very inspiring.
Yeah, it's so fun. It's so beautifully written, and it's very accessible. It's not a book that is asking for you to carry with you a bunch of expertise, but what you pick up along the way, and is really fun. Yeah, I loved that book.
Yeah, me too. So you go to the very impressive dual degree program of
Thank you. Yes,
New England Conservatory.
Yeah,
and so, as you mentioned at the beginning, you're at Tufts. You were political science, and at New England Conservatory. Well, first of all, how does that work? What are your responsibilities from day to day or semester to semester between the two universities for people who don't know those dual degree programs?
Yeah, it's kind of like having divorced parents, but it's way more expensive, maybe. You have two separate with Tufts and NEC. The programs were very separate, and there were like 5. It was capped at 5 enrollees a year into the dual degree, so it was a very small program. And in most years there weren't always 5. So we took this like really sketchy bus between the two schools, which were an hour apart.
I had no idea.
Yeah, it's like a commute. I mean, the bus was like really rickety, and there were times where I would like throw up from car sickness and then go into class. Yeah. So it's kind of a rite of passage as a dual degree student to take the horrible dual degree bus. And then the degree programs were very separate. So I had it was 2 bachelor's degrees. And it was just all the requirements minus the liberal arts requirements for the composition bachelor's. And then at Tufts, I ended up actually double majoring in history and political science.
Okay.
So I was sort of on track actually to go more into like the academia of like philosophy of the ideas, history world.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of that was fear that this sort of lifestyle of being a composer would not be tenable. And as I, had some luck and good situations and was able to, have some opportunities towards the end of my undergraduate that made going to a funded master's degree possible, it became more clear that this was a possibility that I could pursue. But certainly, like you can see my bookshelf, like my political science and history life stays very close to me always. So
I think for most artists, they may not have had an academic training in political discourse and political theory, but I would say in general, artists, because we are by our nature are we're creative folks, and we take in what's the world around us and with thinner skin than most. I would say that most artists are politically motivated, or perhaps, or at least politically the effects of politics, and not just left or right American politics, but politics in a global scale, the global sense, in the historical sense, very important to musicians. Would you agree to that? Wouldn't you say that, Catherine, to be the case?
Yeah. I think, how can you, I think if your job is to, well, at least for me, I think my job is to offer some sort of experience of the world that people didn't know. How do I say this? Like, in order to express something about the world, you have to be engaged with the world. And if the thing you want to express is like, if you want to provide people with an experience like maybe they haven't had access to before, or maybe they didn't know was possible, you know, you need to be open yourself to all the possibilities of things that could happen. And that entails like being engaged with the world around you, sociopolitically, musically, in every way, because the more you're engaged with the world around you, the more you can bring to the audience members' experience, if that makes sense. It's really hard to like phrase that type of stuff.
It's hard to put it into a couple sentences. Those. I
also think, artists like have a sort of like, this might not manifest, like certainly my music is not like political in any way, but artists as a sort of historically a sort of artisan class of people that is interacting with like a lot of different layers of society, have a sort of obligation to be engaged with the social and political climates of their times, because they are privy to, on the one hand, certain elite circumstances, like wonderful, incredible supporters of the arts, and also they're privy to like the more knowing like financial instability or knowing whatever. I think artists have access to those experiences and are able to be a sort of liaison between those worlds. And so their social and political sensitivity to the scenarios of their time is really important, if that makes sense.
Totally. So during this dual degree program, you felt that you were doing the political. You thought you might be going in that route, but then, what changed your mind? And a separate question, somewhat related. When I was in school and college, the world became so much bigger for me. Musically, I started understanding music in a way that I hadn't before, and through interpretation, and through others that have preceded me, various conductors, recordings, videos, etc. One of the questions that was just asked: what were some of your compositional influences, composers who influenced you, maybe then as opposed to now? That all changed. I mean, as we get exposed to more and more music, the list just keeps growing. It might have been Beethoven and Brahms and Schoenberg at 18, but now it's times 1,000 now, and from day to day it changes, right?
Yeah, it's so true. I think these early 20th century pieces, I think like the first time I heard Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, a whole world was opened up for me. Debussy's Prelude to Daphne the Faun, Ravel's Daphne Suite. I mean, when I was like I remember telling my mom I wanted a tattoo of the flute solo from Ravel's Daphnis and Chloe suite, and my mom was like, "Don't do that." Like, you'll regret that. I think those early the fin de siècle era was really, really captivating and important to me as a young composer.
Yeah.
So that includes the Impressionists. That includes the early 12-tone composers, Schoenberg, Berg. I played a lot of Schoenberg's piano music when I was an undergrad. And then, of course, I was never I wasn't nearly as obsessed with Wagner as some people, but hearing that music, the opening of Rheingold, these types of, late 19th century, early 20th century pieces were super influential to me. Now, the sort of second phase of composers that changed my life or idea of what was possible in music making would be the sort of I would call them post Darmstadt. What I mean by that, for people not listening, or for people that are like, what does that mean, is composers in the 70s that were sort of resisting a lot of practices set up post World War II by experimental European composers of organizing sound sort of atonally, or according to like a variety of very specific parameters. So the composers in that category that come to mind for me are like Ligeti was a super inspirational composer who really treated with sound as an audible process, something that everyone could experience, and the sort of any secret processes behind it weren't important. What was important was the sound itself. People like Salvatore Sciarrino, and then people like Kaya Sariaho. So if those names aren't names you're familiar with, I'm happy to
put links to all of these people
cool.
on afterwards, so people can dive into those worlds on their own time, because each one of every one of those composers you mentioned has a whole universe of works and sounds that are so special. Are there any pieces? So we have both your website queued up, and more, probably better in terms of sharing, your SoundCloud profile queued up. Are there any pieces on there that are from in your earlier time as a composer, from then or somewhere around there?
So the earliest piece, let me see. I'm like Googling myself right now, like a total lame-o. Okay, so the earliest piece would be Iaspis. Iaspis is a solo violin piece. It's at the bottom of my website. I think I don't know if it's on my SoundCloud.
How do you spell it so they can figure it out?
Iaspis. It actually still gets performed.
Great.
Kind of I find out that people are playing it, which is always really funny. Actually, someone emailed me. Someone's arranging it for mandolin.
Oh, that's so
cool. Which is really sweet. Yeah.
If it's not on SoundCloud, we can find it on your.
Yeah, it's at the bottom. It's at the very bottom of my audio on my website.
So this brings me to something that I know is very important to you, important to basically every composer. Is that when you write a piece, it's not usually just for your own edification. The very process and the inspiration for the piece can often be surrounding a personal relationship with a musician.
Yes.
And obviously it makes sense, especially when you're in school. You hang out with your best friends, and you're like, I'm a composer, you're a violinist. I'm a composer, you're a pianist. Like, and of course you will end up writing a piece for those people because you love them. They're your friends.
Yeah.
First of all, did this piece that's just been, by the way, it is on your SoundCloud. Cool. Was this piece written for someone?
It was written for my good friend at the time, Robert Anemone, who's a wonderful violinist, who now plays with the Atlanta Symphony. Mm-hmm. And this recording, I believe, on SoundCloud is actually by Robin Bullinger, who was also a really good friend of mine at the time. And she later, as you know, and maybe those listening aren't familiar with, I wrote her a violin concerto for the California Symphony, which was one of the most rewarding projects of my life. But certainly there are composers historically who could write sort of for themselves. I mean, I think Charles Ives is the classic example. True. But that's not me. I need to be writing to share my music. And that often means sharing it with a performer, for a performer, writing for someone specific in mind.
And of course, also composers who were symphonies, who wrote mostly symphonies. They're those are like their novels, and they're not necessarily written for anyone else but for themselves.
Right, but even Wagner with the Ring Cycle, had always been scheming of how to get it performed. Of course. So I mean, so I think that's also really important for me, is that I'm not writing music for the drawer, and the way to sort of guarantee that is to write for those closest to me, that whose relationship I've invested in. I've invested in their musical practice, and they've invested in mine.
So I guess, we can jump to the violin concerto, but I think there might be a couple of things I'm interested before we talk about the California Symphony Association, because I think there's some important things along the way. So you graduate, and what was the determining factors that gave you the confidence to say, you know what, I'm going to pursue composition?
This is, I'm sure it was a variety of things, but I do remember a really pointed conversation I had with one of my political science professors at the time, who I actually co-authored a paper with. Mm-hmm. And I was saying, I think I should also be applying to PhDs in political theory. And she said, you'll get into a good program, but I think you want to go into music. And it was interesting because I hadn't yet sort of decided that for myself. Mm-hmm. But hearing her sort of articulate it for me, seeing that it was apparent to other people that music was something that I was really driven by, was really validating. I think young students need that type of external validation, or maybe not needed, but it's worth giving young people external validation, because you never know like who they might need to hear some positive words from. Mm-hmm. And I think about that a lot now that I teach, just like it is so important to like state the obvious, which is like you can do this if you put your mind to it, for some students, So I think things like that, like little moments like that, for mentors were really, continue to be really important for me.
I think that it's so true. And thank you for bringing that up, because I think the idea of mentorship isn't just for any one particular time in your life, like when you're a teenager, or when you're in college. I think having the idea of being a mentor and having a mentor is a lifelong pursuit. It's always a give and take. You're either doing it, you're mentoring someone, or being mentored by someone else. And in a variety of things, it can, aside from your professional, in both your professional and personal life. I think it's a danger when we feel that we don't need that anymore.
Yeah, for me, if I don't know, I feel like I'm always seeking advice from friends, from mentors in different capacities. And now that I'm in a position where I'm sort of starting to provide that role to people, it's something I take super seriously.
So speaking of which, you are now finishing your PhD at Columbia University.
Yes.
And you now live in New York City. And as you are, part of your PhD program is that you teach. And so tell us about that. What do you teach? How many students do you have? What level are you teaching? The whole gamut of what it means to do a PhD in composition at Columbia University. So
I should say I'm a doctoral candidate at Columbia. I'm also on faculty at Mannes. So I do have teaching. I teach at Columbia, but I also have a studio and I teach orchestration at Mannes. So
that's right.
So at Columbia, as a teacher, what does it mean to get a doctorate in composition? I don't know. It's a great question.
It's a whole other. That's an offline conversation.
Skip. So at Columbia, I teach this class called Music Humanities. I think actually maybe some of my students are still watching. They might have tuned out. which is like an intro to Western music. It's sort of a mix of musical history, music appreciation class. And that class is interesting because everyone at Columbia has to take it, regardless of whether or not they're a music major. Engineers have to take it. Science majors have to take it. History majors have to take it. Everyone has to take this class called Music Humanities.
Oh, that's cool.
So it's a wonderful mix of students that a lot of them really are experiencing this music you and I take for granted as like the standard rep or whatever, totally for the first time. So it's super fun because you get a very fresh reaction to material that maybe for you feels stale or familiar, and it's very refreshing to revisit. Like revisiting, it's always super fun for me to revisit Jupiter Symphony because it's just like, yeah, this piece is such a delight, oh, yay. Thanks, Rishi. So these sort of, or people's reaction to pieces I love. Like I shared Lochenmann the other week in class, and so much of my class really didn't like it. And it's so, that music to me, like Lochenmann's music is so beautiful. And it was hard. It was interesting to remember, like, that wasn't my first reaction to that music either.
Oh, really?
No.
For those of you who are going to look it up, we'll post it. Helmut Lochenmann is a fantastic German composer. Amazing.
So his piano piece Guiro, which I showed, is actually, the keys never get played. It's all just the sounds of different sort of percussion sounds, or they're called extended techniques, non-standard playing techniques that the pianist is performing. And
that's right up your alley.
Yeah, and that's like my bread and butter now. So, but it wasn't always. So it's always interesting to revisit those things. And then at Mannes, my composition students are like a total joy. I have undergraduates and graduate students, and watching their growth over the course of the semester has been just super inspiring.
Do they get to have their pieces performed at various times throughout the semester? Or is it more of what's it like, the program there?
Mannes is a great, there are so many opportunities for student performances. Of course, right now, a lot of my students had been preparing for certain recitals and concerts that are not going to happen. But one thing I'm really looking forward to that's sort of not totally official yet, but probably okay to say, is that a friend of mine who is a professor at a European conservatory and I are setting up a studio collaboration. She's an accordion professor, and so we're going to create pairings between our studios so that my students will be writing for her students, and there will be a dialogue. And facilitating those kinds of opportunities for people to have one-on-one contact with great instrumentalists is something I get really excited about when I'm teaching. And I always want to make sure my students have access to a sort of hands-on or physical approach to writing music, because then they can learn about how the instruments work, the mechanisms of sound production, by getting their hands dirty, which I always think is a great way to learn.
Yeah, of course. So while in school, obviously you were writing, I would assume, mostly like your students are now, and how you are devising them for this collaboration with your friend, your colleague. You were writing mostly for friends. When did you start writing for orchestra?
I think my first orchestra commission was from the Albany Symphony. Mm-hmm. David Allen Miller commissioned me to write a piece for his Summer American Music Festival. Before that, I wrote an orchestra piece I wrote a few orchestra pieces that were read by New England Conservatory when I was an undergrad. And then I participated in the New York Youth Symphony First Music Commission, which is a wonderful program. Yeah, I did that in 2013. I wrote a piano concerto, a 10-minute piece.
Their commissioning program is amazing. Correct me if I'm wrong, but when I was living in New York, I believe it was 3 commissions a year, one for each of their concerts.
So orchestra, chamber, and I think a jazz, or maybe it's 3 orchestra. I can't remember.
All I know is I remember three orchestra pieces a year. Yeah. For each one of their concerts, they did a new piece.
Yeah, I think
concert, which is amazing. For a youth orchestra.
Well, they were amazing. So that was my first sort of commission. My first professional commission would have been from David Allen Miller in the Albany Symphony. But I had done the first.
What was the name of that? What was that piece?
Drift. It's the piece I wrote for David Allen Miller is called Drift. And unfortunately that recording is not available online. But they did a wonderful job. And I wrote the orchestra piece that is available online is Leaf Catalog, which I wrote for the Yale Philharmonia when I was a master's student there. And that was sort of did the rounds of composer reading performances of Minnesota composers or Minnesota Orchestra and the American Composers Orchestra. It's been performed a few times. So that piece is the orchestra piece that is available to listen to. As you know, orchestra recordings have different sort of rules about sharing than others.
Yes.
So
hopefully that'll change to a certain degree, given the certain circumstances we all find ourselves in. So orchestra pieces became, it's so fascinating to me because, to write an orchestral piece is so complicated and just, time consuming, because when you write a solo violin piece, that can be incredibly challenging unto itself, but it's really for one line of music.
Yeah.
Whatever activities you give that solo line, and violin sonata or French horn sonata, horn and piano, that's two, string quartet. It's just it becomes infinitely more intriguing and complex and time consuming to write a 10-minute piece for orchestra. Exponentially more complicated. It can be. And of course, the catch-22 is that when you're writing for an orchestra, often that piece will be played once, maybe more than once. If you're lucky, more than once. But there's a strong likelihood that that piece will be premiered by that awesome orchestra that's commissioned you, and then for no reason that makes any sense in the world. I can't figure it out, and I do this all the time. It's not taken up by other orchestras because they have their own things that they're doing, or there are a variety of unfortunate reasons. Does this inform? I guess the question is embedded in that. Of course, when you get an orchestra commission, you're not going to say no, but I do know folks who sort of shy away from that because they want to write music. They want to write music that's going to be performed. They want to write music out in the world, and orchestra music may or may not be.
I think I often write for a performance. I don't think I anticipate or bother
or care
worry myself with the idea of a second performance. I am writing for that performance, and writing for orchestra is so exhilarating because you have access to not only a variety of different instruments, but when they come together and create combinations, or as I like to call them, timbral hybrids, you have access to instruments that don't exist till you invent them by virtue of the combinations you're creating. It's like shades of paint. You have access to infinite shades of the color blue with the orchestra. And that is like time consuming and exhausting, but it's also, there are so many models of composers that find ways to make that process, I think, accessible to you when you're looking at their scores. Like Debussy, for example, right? Just this incredibly colorful composer, such beautiful timbres, such beautiful combinations and textures. But when you take apart his music or look at what the activity that's happening on the pages, you can sort of liken it to a painting. There's a foreground, a middle ground, a background. If you start getting more than a foreground, middle ground, or background, then this sort of texture or musical idea you're trying to communicate might become obfuscated. Maybe you want that obfuscation, but maybe you want to play with the sort of ebb and flow of what the foreground, middle ground, background is. So it's like, yes, you're dealing with many lines on a staff, but really if you think of your content or material in sort of these chunks of like 3 layers, 4 layers, then within those chunks, you can start to shade, you can start to add texture, color. I mean, I think the visual art metaphor is very useful here. And I think Debussy and Ravel in their orchestration are great teachers of that. Does that answer? That didn't answer your question. Sorry, I don't know.
It only answered your question. It does. I mean, basically the answer is it's worth it. No matter how difficult it is, it's worth it.
For me, yes.
Right.
For other artists, I mean, for me, I express myself through detail. The orchestra is really brought to life with detail, and so it's an opportunity. It's a vehicle of expression for me. I find extremely powerful. I'd
like to talk a little bit about the last year's commission, because it was, as you mentioned, an exhilarating and special project for you and for us at the California Symphony. And it is it's a piece we can talk about without necessarily playing the piece, because there are 4 pieces of which we can share, which were there were 4 movements, and each movement, talk about it. You know it better than me.
So the concerto, I don't know, Donato, you might know it better. You looked at it more recently than me. The concerto is in 4 movements, and each movement is inspired by a piece of solo violin repertoire that my friend Robin has played, or that we've sort of experienced together as friends. Mm-hmm. And so the first movement is based off of Berio's Sequenza number 7 for solo violin. Luciano Berio was an Italian composer. This piece was written in 1976. Mm-hmm. And Robin Bollinger has a wonderful recording of it on her album. And my piece opens with the same exact dyad unison A that Berio's piece opens with. It's a very dramatic, intense solo violin piece. And then the second movement is based off of Paganini's, Niccolo Paganini's 6 caprices from his 24 caprices, which are these monumentally virtuosic pieces for solo violin that when Robin was an undergrad, she played all 24 of in a single solo recital, which is an insane thing to do. And she intertwined it with stories of her life and sort of stories of Paganini that she created a sort of drama or narrative through as we experienced these pieces. So that was a very memorable experience to me. So the 6 caprice is all these double trills.
It's such an amazing caprice.
Yeah, it's my favorite.
Finger buster that must be to actually even do. I don't even know how they do it. And then on top of that, like on top of the technique, to then turn it into music is amazing. And I think that's something very special about Robin's playing, is she takes this very technical, almost some people might think it's like angular or purely virtuosic show music, and she turns it into Mozart, and she turns it into just like lightness. And so the second movement is sort of a response to the Paganini 6 caprice. The third movement is a response to this beautiful pizzicato opening of the Fritz Kreisler, the second movement of his 4th sonata. Sorry, not Fritz. It's called the Fritz Kreisler. Eugenie Zai. Izai was a violinist who was also a composer. He wrote 6 solo sonatas for the violin, all of which are incredible. They're not really repertoire known outside of the violin playing world. It's so true.
I highly recommend listening. They're beautiful, beautiful pieces. And then the final movement is based off of Sciarrino's Capricci for Say Violin, which is a piece written, I believe, in the 80s.
That's right. If I recall, 83. That could be, my memory could.
So 2 more contemporary pieces and 2 pieces sort of from the more historical canon.
But in fact, those 4 pieces that you just mentioned were pieces that were influenced by prior compositions.
Yeah, and that was totally an accident. But I don't know about the Paganini. Well, I guess, yeah, of course, the Paganini, the Bieber.
That's right.
Yeah, but this is all, the idea that a piece is written in isolation is,
of course.
A nice story. But I think the more interesting story is the network of connections that form all music.
And in the compositional process, and there's was a lovely blog post that you wrote about this, about spending time with Robin, not only with the pieces that she played that inspired you, that you've just mentioned, but in the process of composition, you mentioned about how you would write something and send it to her, or have her play it right in front of you, and she would say, "Oh, that's not hard enough," or something like that. Can you talk a little bit about that process?
Yeah, of course, I always exchange materials back and forth. I mean, for me, like when I get really into a thing, I'll be texting you screenshots of things, like asking about how it's notated, and you always respond very promptly, "Thank you," and I'm sorry to whoever you were supposed to be paying full attention to during. But I do this a lot with friends, where I send them material as I'm working on it. I recently finished a piece for a friend of mine, the accordion player who I'm setting up the studio collaboration with, the same sort of thing. So with Robin, I'm able to do that. Screenshots of the score, screenshots of whatever I'm typing into the notation software program. And so the pizzicato passage actually took a lot to figure out in my piece, because it's these rolled chords, kind of pizzicato chords, and figuring out which ones sat comfortably for her. Or even if they sat comfortably, maybe just because of the registration, they didn't sort of resonate the way I was hoping. Mm-hmm. So that was a passage that took a lot of back and forth to find the right material for. That's in the third movement. But then in the last movement, she was like, "I want something like, I want you to write me like showstopper hard music." So I wrote her this sort of molto perpetua passage that's just really fast and insane. And then it gradually glisses microtonally, like articulated, sort of, she articulates down while slowly glissing. So the passage becomes like microtonally warped. And it's really hard. And she sounds great.
I knew it would be wonderful working with her, but because I hadn't worked with her before this concerto, and what I so love about Robin, many things, but aside from the fact she is an extraordinary violinist, she is such a positive force.
Yeah.
That it's one thing to walk in with a smile, but it's another thing to have a personality that lightens up the room, that inspires everyone around you, and she has that, and that's not a very common thing.
I think it's something I tried to capture in the concerto, is this lightness that I love so much about her.
What are you working on? You mentioned this a little bit already. What are you working on now? What do you keep? I mean, maybe who knows what we want to talk about in terms of how we're doing at this exact moment in this very weird time.
Yeah.
What are some of the projects that are on slate for you? There's some exciting things coming down the pike we can talk about now.
Well, we don't know yet if it's going to be postponed. I sort of ostensibly I'm writing a piece for the LA Phil for the Green Umbrella series. I'm very excited about that project. It might not happen as planned, but we will see. I'm actually, to be honest with you, everything on my life has been pretty much put on hold. So I'm spending the time making music in other ways. I'm composing small pieces for friends.
Oh, that's cool.
So this accordion piece for Hanji, I'm writing a piece for my friend and roommate Albert Cano-Smith, who who the Las Vegas Philharmonic community knows. So I'm writing him a piece that he will play next October at his YCA debut. And I'm taking violin lessons.
Really?
Yeah, I'm gonna start taking violin lessons more seriously as soon as I finish teaching for the semester. And I've been making wind chimes. I love wind chimes. I have a lot. You can see one here, and there's one here. So I've been making wind chimes out of various found objects materials. Yeah, I actually have. I'll show you I have a bottle cap. I'll show you really quick.
Oh, yeah. You're on mute, Catherine. You're on mute. This is fabulous. Was this a recent creation?
Yeah, I made it like a week ago, and I made another one for a friend, and I have some other ideas for wind chimes. And for the LA Phil piece, if it ever does happen, I have this idea of giving everyone in the ensemble a handmade wind chime that they can play.
Actually, we should talk about this. So
that's weird. So I'm doing okay, is what I'm trying to say. I'm doing fine.
Okay, making a wind chime out of bottle caps. You got to find things to do, and you're being productive. But this is an aspect of your music that's so intriguing. That I think everyone enjoys doing, is that you use this. You really try and succeed at creating the sounds of nature, the random sounds of nature. And by whether it is by using what we call extended techniques of all the instruments in the orchestra, or actually having other things that they play, they beat against or they scrape or whatever, creating whatever sound you've heard outside that you want to make part of your musical expression. How is this? Tell us a little bit about this.
I don't know. I like sound. I like all the sounds. Yeah. I don't discriminate against the sounds I like. And I think for me, something I find expressive in music is when sort of conventional musical idioms are interspersed with the noise of like life, because in daily life we are surrounded by noise, whether that noise is natural or man-made. And I think that those noise elements are an important sort of expression of our identity as people today. And it's something I try to integrate in my music. Of course, my interpretation is always, I want to create like a sense, I want to turn noise into something magical. Right. But yeah, I mean, to me, a major triad is so much more expressive if there's like a slight scratch behind it, just like the faintest sense of fragility, that suddenly that C major triad like explodes for me when that happens.
I think the process, what I think orchestras appreciate about you is that you're not the first one to obviously to want to do extended techniques and whatever, use other instruments that may not be the instrument they play, or other things, found objects. But you are very specific. What orchestra musicians, it frustrates them usually, is that there aren't enough instructions about what they actually are to do with that sound. And you give them very specific information, which is so helpful, because so often a composer will write something and then will be part of at the rehearsal process, and someone will ask them about, well, what do you want? How do you actually want this to sound? They're like, oh, just do something. And that is the most, first of all, it's a waste of everyone's time when you say something like that. And it doesn't really solve the issue. And if you want them to play two rocks together, and there's a 1,000 ways of doing that.
Yeah, we discovered that in the last workshop, didn't we?
What?
So we discovered that in the last workshop.
Anyway, I think it's very much appreciated that you try your best to give just enough information to make the sound that is you desired.
Yeah, it's a hard balance. I mean, for me, it's really important that I have a clear identity of what the piece is in my head before I hear it in real life. Not to say that identity won't change and I won't be surprised, but to form a clear oral identity of the sound in my head before to imagine it is an important part of my practice. And yeah, as you know, so I started making these videos. Like for Illuminate, I made a video for the string section of me demoing all the non-standard playing techniques, and I find that works pretty well. I did that with Indianapolis Symphony Orchestra recently for a piece of mine, and that all went very smoothly. And musicians are excited. It's like you have to trust each other. Like I have to trust that they've spent so many hours dedicating their lives to a certain way of playing their instrument. And when you ask them to do something that is not that can be uncomfortable. And then to build trust with me, I have to show that like I understand that and know how to produce it myself, and that it doesn't, and that it serves a greater musical purpose. It's not just arbitrary.
Well, our hour is up. Actually, an hour and 4 minutes. We'll post as much as we can with the links to all the pieces we talked about.
Let me know if you need any help with that.
I'll be reaching out perhaps for sure. Yeah. I think what we'll do, because since I'm not playing music during this hour, we'll produce some sort of playlist or something curated that you would like everyone to hear, that we'll post on this in the comments or something.
Cool. Sounds fun.
Thank you.
Cool. Thanks so much for your time, and thanks whoever's tuning in. Appreciate it.
We're there at one point or another.
All right. Thanks, everyone. And thanks so much, Donato. Be well. Stay safey. Safey. It's safe plus healthy. It's a new word.
Next time we'll talk about cocktails.
Oh, yeah. It's 5:00 here, so.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.